Thank you, Chris, for that personal and thought-provoking talk. I am now going to talk about some complex and over-engineered things with unforeseen consequences. And I hope that you will see that actually you should be in favor of them. So, all right. So what I'm going to talk about today actually is largely about Lamport signatures and ways of thinking about script constructions in the existing Bitcoin script and kind of new ways of thinking about script and new things that we can do. I will talk a bit about opcat and a bit about covenants and stuff, but that's actually really not the focus of my talk. A couple months ago at Advancing Bitcoin, I did a talk purely about cat, and I filled half an hour with just like listing random things that popped into my head over that day. The video is not up yet, but hopefully it will be soon, and for people who want to hear that, that's where to find it. So I'm going to start by kind of explaining what a Lamport signature is. I'll leave this link up for a sec, and then I'll tab over, and we can kind of scroll through this blog post together. And then once I've explained what a Lamport signature is and how you can do it in script, then we'll talk a bit about what that means. So a Lamport signature is a type of digital signature. It dates back to 1979. This is Leslie Lamport. He's a very famous computer scientist. He invented TLA+, which is a protocol for analyzing concurrent multi-party protocols of various forms. He invented LaTeX, and he invented several other things. He also invented Lamport signatures. The way that these work is that your signing key consists of a whole group of hashes. So you think of a whole bunch of random data, you hash up the random data, you hash up different parts of it, and you publish all of these hashes. Okay? And then when you want to sign a message, what you do is you break the message into bits. A bunch of like 0, 1, 0, 0, 1. And if the first bit of your message is a 0, you reveal one preimage. If it's a 1, you reveal a different preimage. So you kind of like have a pair of your hashes, and you reveal one of them for the first bit. You do it again with this next bit. You reveal one of the two, depending whether it's a 0 or 1, and go through your whole message that way. And so your signature is just revealing basically parts of your secret key. It's kind of a weird thing. And so this is what's called a one-time signature. So as soon as you sign once, you've revealed half your secret key. If you sign again, you're going to reveal another half, and then people can mix and match, and it's not going to work. But it is a secure signature for the one time that you sign it. It has some kind of neat features. It's an idea that's been floating around for so long because its security just depends on whether your hash functions themselves are secure, whether they can be modeled as a random oracle or not. And that's something that largely isn't affected by quantum computers, or at least hashes like SHA-2 we expect will remain secure even in the presence of quantum computers, and therefore Lamport signatures will, with a lot of hand-waving about the difference between random oracles and quantum random oracles and stuff like that, because I haven't done my reading here. But they're a popular idea for that reason, even though they predate Bitcoin. They predate hash functions, actually, amusingly. In 1979, I don't know what kind of hash functions there were, but there weren't any practically usable secure hash functions until the early 90s. MD5 was probably the first one. So it had a long time where it was just a purely theoretical construction. So let me tab over to this blog post here. It's not essential that we understand how to do Lamport signatures in script, but I want to show you this just in case you care, and we'll jump into it. They've got this big script. You're thinking like, wow, look at all those opcodes, but you can kind of see it's like the same thing over and over. So before I jump into this, I'll explain the one big limitation of Lamport signatures in script, which is that you can only sign a 32-bit value. And the reason is that Bitcoin script can only really reason about 32-bit values. You kind of have all these nice mathematical opcodes, right? You've got add, you've got dup, you've got comparisons, you've got, well, that's really all you need are add and comparisons. And you only get them for 32-bit values. So what we're doing here, and this line is basically just like the same line, repeated over and over. So I'll highlight this. And there's some swaps and stuff and drops, and those are just like kind of accounting for the way the script stack machine works. But you can see we've got two hashes floating around here, HK01, HK00. what you do as a signer, and this is a script pub key, so this is kind of your public key, is this giant script where all these hashes are embedded in it. As a signer, if you're signing a message whose first bit is 0, you reveal this HK0, K00, which I should highlight here. If your first bit is a 1, you reveal K01. And how does this scheme work? Well, you literally just pick one, you reveal the preimage, and what this script does is it tries hashing the thing that you revealed. And if the hash equals the target hash corresponding to the 1 bit, then it puts a 1 on the stack. That's what this equal opcode is doing. If it is equivalent to the 0 bit, then it puts a 0 on the stack. Okay, and I think I'm reading that right. And if it matches neither, then it's just going to abort the script. That's what this equal verify is doing here. So basically, you reveal a series of hash preimages. It will leave a 0 or a 1 on the stack, and if your preimage doesn't match either of the hashes, your script will abort, so it's just invalid signature. And so we go through here, you can see instead of pushing a 1, the second time it pushes, okay, these are shifts. Wow, what a confusing notation. You can see it's shifting the 1 by each. So here it's a 1, on the second line it's a 2, on the third line it's a 4, right? Then it's an 8, then a 16, a 32, and so on. And what you're doing is your signature is just building up the bits of your message, kind of as represented as powers of 2. And then finally, at the end, kind of interspersed, we've got all these add opcodes floating around. So you keep adding, you kind of have this accumulator. So you reveal a bunch of hash preimages, the script translates those into powers of 2, we add all the powers to 2 together, and we have constructed a number in the end, okay? And then if you're supposed to be signing like a specific number or something, you would just put that number explicitly on the stack and use equal verify to tie your signature to it. But that's not essential. What you're doing is you're simultaneously putting a number on the stack and a Lamport signature of the number. And that's kind of cool because we've kind of been thinking about signatures on Bitcoin. We talk about the check sig opcode, we talk about check sig from stack. Normally, you are signing the transaction data. And there's this idea, this kind of like half of a covenant proposal, or probably almost everything the whole covenant proposal, if you're squint enough. There's this proposal check sig from stack, which will let you sign arbitrary data. And what I'm saying is that you can actually sign arbitrary data as long as it's 32 bits or less, okay? And this idea, you can see from the date in the URL here, right? It's from, I guess that's July of 2021. This is posted. There was a follow-up post, I think a year later, kind of about quantum hardness, and that's usually what people care about when they talk about Lamport signatures. A couple years later, in October of 2023, there was a mailing post from Robin Linus. I'll just quickly show you it. We only really care about the title for our purposes, which is BitVM. Okay, whoops, wow. I should check what windows I have open. This is a post announcing BitVM. Okay, the idea behind BitVM is that you can do arbitrary computations on Bitcoin. And this particular mailing this post, and almost everything else published about BitVM is kind of difficult to understand. What it suggested doing is basically you split your entire program. If you want to do an arbitrary program in Bitcoin script, you compile it into a giant circuit of NAND gates. And then you implement a NAND gate in Bitcoin script, which is very easy with just zeros and ones and so forth. And then you use this kind of selective hash reveal thing, which Robin later found out, and that's now the way we talk about it, is a Lamport signature. You have 2 bits going in, you have 1 bit going out. You Lamport sign each of the bits going in with a particular Lamport key, which somehow identifies which part of the circuit is in and which input is in and all that good stuff. You Lamport sign the output with a particular key that identifies which part of the circuit you're in and that you're signing an output. And then using these Lamport signatures and some kind of obscure, non-obvious properties of the Lamport signatures, this allows you to actually tie together all of these independent scripts that are all just implementing a NAND gate. And then what you do is you take all of these NAND gate scripts and you put them into transactions and you build these enormous billion-entry Merkle trees. Merkle is a contemporary of Lamport, and they're both very famous for very similar reasons. And you build these enormous Merkle trees, you build these enormous transaction trees, you have this challenge response protocol, you have these like binary searches, you have like all this like anti-equivocation stuff, like it's really quite elaborate. And what we've seen over the last couple of days is a lot of talks about variants of BitVM, like BitVMX, all the names are blurring together in my head, but a lot of different ideas of building these elaborate arbitrary computations in script. And what the focus of these talks has always been like on this elaborate transaction structure and this pre-signed transactions and these protocols and stuff like that. And it becomes very, for one thing, quite difficult to follow, and for another thing, quite difficult or easy to miss the forest for the trees here. And see that actually there's a novel script construction at the bottom of all this. Like the way these transactions are being hooked together is not the good old, like you sign a transaction and then you spend the outputs into another transaction and then like build chains this way kind of thing. Okay, that's historically the way that we've done multi-party protocols, like elaborate protocols that require state. If you have a bunch of transactions that spend each other's input, you build these elaborate trees. If you have some sort of branch or like some state that might change, then you need to fork your tree, right? And then you have like an exponential blow up in the number of pre-signed transactions and so forth. And there's really kind of a clever thing here in that you can avoid this exponential blow up in the number of pre-signed transactions. And sometimes you can avoid pre-signing entirely by using these Lamport signatures. So over the next couple of slides, I'm going to kind of build that idea up. And that's really the crux of my talk, is that I think this like narrow, specific construction is really a super cool thing and probably opens up a lot of avenues for exploring script that don't necessarily require you buy into the BitVM, like prove or verify, or like billions of transactions kind of model with these enormous Merkle trees. So the first idea, right, is pretty straightforward. Lamport signatures are a form of checksig from stack, right? You can sign arbitrary data. That's already kind of cool, right? Because one of the more popular ideas for Bitcoin that nobody really implemented is the idea of oracles. And it's not nobody, actually. There's a discrete log contract project from Taj and Calais and a couple other people. But the idea is that you have a script, and the script does something or it does something else depending on a signature from some third party who just signs an outcome. So you can imagine doing sports betting this way, where you have like a sports league of some sort just signs the outcome of games. You have a script that checks whether or not they said, you know, the game was won by which team, and then the script pays out money to one or the other party. And you could also imagine like insurance companies like signing out certain like disaster outcomes and like an insurance contract that pays out or doesn't, depending on, you know, whether somebody has died or whether, you know, some disaster has happened or whatever. And all of these sort of seem to require a form of checksig from stack, right? You need to be able to check a signature on arbitrary data. Well, I'm telling you, you can do that as long as your data fits in 32 bits. And actually, if you have multiple keys, you can just do multiple signatures. So you can have as many bits as you want. And so like the outcome of a specific game fits in 1 bit. Okay, well, if it's a game between 2 people. The outcome of, well, you could fit like the price of some stock into a few bits, maybe 10, certainly 20. You could fit a timestamp into 32, probably, if you choose your minimum and maximum dates carefully enough. Right, a lot of these applications, you know, you can actually do this, okay? So already this is cool, and somebody should do it. Not me, I don't build stuff. I just write slides. But, and here's something I've mentioned, right? This is only for small script. It's only for 32-bit objects. And let me just say a couple words about small script and big script, and that might be the last I mentioned, cat. Bitcoin script, as we've seen lots of lists of opcodes and ideas for new opcodes and so forth. The existing script system kind of exists in 2 realms, right? There is what I call small script, which is a script that operates on 32-bit values. And this has addition and subtraction. It has a less than or equal to operator. And you can actually implement any program whatsoever in terms of less than or equal to. It's a general circuit component. So small script is, aside from the obvious limits here, the opcode limits and the weight limits and so forth, and also the 32-bit size limit, is fully general, right? It's Turing complete, so to speak. Or it can certainly verify the trace of any program that only works on these small values. So that's kind of cool. You can do anything. Separately, there is what I call big script. And this is the subset of script that works on values larger than 32 bits. And what can you do with big script? Well, you can interpret elements as signatures and public keys and do check sig, so you can verify a signature on the transaction. You can hash the data, and you can produce hashes. Hashes are 20 or 32 bytes, depending which hash function you use. And you can check for equality and one or two other obscure kind of things. So if you have two large blobs, you can check them for equality. And none of these are particularly useful. The two useful things you can do, it says, right, are checking the signature on the transaction, and you can verify Lamport signatures, curiously. That actually involves big script because you're using these hashes, which are 32-byte objects. Not 32 bits now, it's 32 bytes, 256 bits. So if there were a way that and check sig, I should just say explicitly, is a transaction introspection opcode, right? That is the building block you need for covenants, is the ability to look at the transaction. Well, check sig does it, right? It pulls the transaction data out, it hashes it, it does some sort of EC operation to compute a signature verification, and you're off to the races. So if there was some opcode that would let you kind of fish the transaction introspection data out of big script, where you can access it through check sig, and into small script, where you can do arbitrary computations and constrain it, then you would have covenants. And this is why opcat is a big deal. Because opcat lets you break apart big objects into small ones, and it lets you assemble small objects into big ones. Okay, and that's really why, fundamentally, that's why you can get covenants from opcat. And all of the weird tricks with Schnorr signatures and like other elaborate things and Merkle trees where you like look up large computations, those are really just optimizations. Because what's happening here is that you can break large objects up, including signatures, which have embedded in them all of the transaction data, and then you can drop them into small script. And then assuming you can fit into a 4-meg block, you can write an elaborate script that's actually going to constrain what's going into that signature, okay? And this actually is a little bit surprising and new that you can do all these things, and a lot of the work that the BitVM people have been doing is figuring out in script, like, how can you implement every single RISC-V opcode, and how can you do like things like multiplication, or how can you, they implemented Blake3, say, the hash function Blake3, purely in terms of script opcodes, right? And I think until then, nobody was trying to do stuff like that. Because like, for one thing, what's the point? But like, for another thing, nobody really expected you to be able to do it, because script kind of sucks so much. But you should have expected it, because script can do less than or equal to, so script can do anything, and it can. All right. Excuse me. Let's move on to the next idea. I'm sorry, could somebody get me some water? Anyone? Cool, somebody's running, thank you. So my next idea is that Lamport signatures are, we can think of them as a form of commitment. And here's kind of the cool idea, and this is what BitVM is doing. In order to link transactions, in order to link the outputs of certain gates to the input of other gates, is they're abusing Lamport signatures as a form of commitment. And the idea here, remember, is that while I said, thank you. So I mentioned that Lamport signatures are one-time signatures, right? Meaning if you sign more than one time, then you've leaked your key and all of your signatures become worthless because anybody can forge them. Well, we can do, by the way, I am watching the time. This is the last talk, and I appreciate you all coming. And I will try not to ramble late into the night. But this is cool, I promise. And it's going to get cooler, even though well, you'll see. You'll see. It's going to get cooler. So, okay, that's kind of cool. You lose security. That sucks. Well, another true fact is that it's very easy to verify whether somebody signed two things using a Lamport signature. Because as I mentioned, when you sign data, right, you look at the bits of the data, you reveal one of the two pre-images for your hashes corresponding to that bit. Well, if you sign two different pieces of the data, Well, if they're different, they differ in some bit. There's some particular bit that's a 0 in one of them and a 1 in the other. That's what it means to be different. And so you have to reveal both hash preimages, right? You reveal one of the preimages in your first sig and the other in the second sig. Well, they're both preimages are now floating out there, and anybody can grab them. And so what you can do in script is you can write a script that says, basically, if you reveal both hash preimages, then the coins can be spent by some sort of like penalizing party. So a lot of the elaborate transaction structures and so on that you see in things like BitVM are just kind of making this idea work. The idea is pretty simple, though. What it is that you have people signing data, and if they ever sign different data with the same key, then you take coins away from them in order to punish them, or you like kind of hijack a certain sequence of transactions and you redirect the coins somewhere other than they intended to be, with the goal of disincentivizing and deterring any sort of cheating, okay? And so if you accept on faith that somehow this cheating is deterred and it's not going to happen, then what you're left with is this kind of strange sort of commitment where we can think of these signatures as committing to a specific value, where your keys, your Lamport's keys kind of identify what value you're committing to. And in BitVM, in this kind of simple form of BitVM from the mailing list, the way that would look like is you have a script that's computing a NAND gate, right? You have two inputs, you have a single output. Well, you have a Lamport key where it's kind of tagged, kind of out of band, not part of the script. The specific Lamport key that's used to sign one input, and the specific Lamport key signed the other input, and the specific Lamport key for the output. All of those are three different keys. They are unique to that specific gate, and the key that's used to sign the output of this gate is the same as the key used to sign the input of whatever gate is connected to, okay? And so the idea here is that when you sign, or when you indicate what the output of your NAND gate is, you have to produce a Lamport signature signing that value. And now you are stuck. That key can only sign that one value without you getting slashed and something bad happening and so forth. Which means that when that same key shows up at the input of another gate, now you have to reveal the same value. And so you're able to transmit a value from the output to the input here. And those two transactions, or those two scripts, don't have to be connected to each other on the blockchain. They don't have to be part of the same transaction chain. They don't have to be related at all, or they can be related in weird ways, right? They could be in different tap branches of the same output, even. And this will still, they could be on different blockchains. One doesn't have to be on a blockchain. None of this does. And this is a really kind of cool, spooky action at a distance kind of thing. And that construction, I feel like, shouldn't be lost in the noise of BitVM and these large transaction trees, right? This seems like a really kind of powerful idea. And so let's generalize this a little bit. What we have here is kind of a global key value store. And when I say global, I mean much larger than like this universe. I mean like size 2 to the 256, or arguably much larger, where the keys of this key value store. So for those who don't know, a key value store, right, is just like a giant lookup table. Like Amazon EC2 or AWS or S3. Thank you. There we go. Amazon S3 is a key value store. You give it a key, right, which would be an identifier for your data, and then it returns the data specifically located at that key, kind of thing. And a hash map is kind of a data structure used to implement a key value store, typically. And so there's a bit of a pun here, right? So your key is both a Lamport public key, and it's also the key for your key value store, right? So I've got this. So if Rusty is not going to use stable diffusion, then neither will I. So I'm going to take this modern TV show and this modern meme format here. So welcome to the Lamport signatures, Drew says, where the keys are keys, it's a pun, and the values aren't equivocated. Equivocation is a cryptographic term that just means you reveal two different values when you were supposed to reveal the same value. And in some way, you should be punished for this. And the way that happens in practice, typically, is that you would have some sort of slashing transaction somewhere. And again, I'm not going to dig into that because I feel it distracts from what's going on here. So we have this giant key value store, where the keys are, the space of lookup keys is the entire space of Lamport signature keys, which, as I mentioned, are large collections of hashes. And these hashes are 256 bits is an enormous, enormous space. And the key value store, these keys have kind of the curious property that each of them is owned by a specific person. The specific person who knows the pre-images of the hashes being used to do these lookups is the only one who's able to put a value into this. And they are the only one, well, yeah, they're the only one who's allowed to write a value, and they're only allowed to write it once. And until they write a value, nobody else can read from it. So they kind of like, there's this place in the world that they're specifically allowed to write, and as soon as they write something there, then it gets broadcast to the world, and then it can be reused, and they're unable to erase it. And this is kind of a pretty cool primitive. So here's kind of a drawing that I did in Excel because I am lazy, kind of illustrating this idea, right? So on the left, you've got all your keys, right, and you're mapping them to values. The mapping is a Lamport signature. The Lamport signature is kind of the physical means by which this mapping happens. So because I knew I would be out of time, I didn't really elaborate on this, but let me quickly try to run through an example of how this can be used on the blockchain, okay, and then I'll wrap up. So there's a game, tic-tac-toe, and actually before I start, I should mention there's a BitVM guy called SuperTestNet who has implemented the thing that I've compressed into 3 bullet points here. And the idea is that you're playing the game tic-tac-toe on the blockchain for some reason, okay? You've got 2 parties. They are going to each put X's and O's into this abstract grid, right, a 9x9 grid, and so on. There are 9 moves at most 9 moves in a game of tic-tac-toe. And each person takes turns. And historically, kind of the way you would implement this, if you insisted on doing such a ridiculous thing, right, is in kind of a series of pre-signed transactions where you would publish transactions in order. So for the first move, right, player X goes and there's 9 possibilities, and then on the second move there's only 8 possibilities and so on. So you get these 9 factorial different paths through the game. 9 factorial is about 350,000. You have 350,000 pre-signed transactions, and you need to like make sure each of them has kind of like penalty output. So if you try to go backwards in time, and like I guess you have to commit each one and wait for it to get confirmed and continue and so on. It would involve a tremendous amount of pre-signed transactions. You can see how it just wouldn't generalize to any real game, right? Like tic-tac-toe is not interesting because you know, any adult can solve the whole game in their head, right? Try to get into larger games that only computers can solve, or even larger ones that computers can't solve. You just can't. The space is too high. But we can do it using just 9 transactions in a row. Again, with some backout conditions and stuff and slashing, you gotta line up, but don't worry about it. It's only a linear amount of overhead. You can literally just do 9 transactions in a row. And in each transaction, you have a Lamport public key that, kind of out of band, is tagged with this is the player who's doing, and this is which move it is. And when you want to play, so before you play, you kind of pre-sign all these transactions. So now you've got all these values, all of these Lamport signatures corresponding to the keys, but the values are not set. Lamport signatures corresponding to the move, but the values are not set. And the actual values are the moves. So now, when player X wants to move, he picks a point on the board, he Lamport signs the point on the board, and then he publishes the first transaction where he reveals whatever hash pre-images he needs to sign his position from 1 to 9. Okay, and this is kind of a cool thing, because the transaction, the output that he's spending here, already exists and already has his Lamport signature, it already has his Lamport public key. So it's already this script pub key confirmed in the blockchain, deeply buried, has committed to what his move is, but he hasn't decided yet. The specific move it commits to is only decided after he decides what he's going to commit to. Okay? And that means that the TX ID doesn't change, even though in some kind of moral sense, the commitment inside of the script pub key has changed what it's committing to. The script pub key itself doesn't change, and the pre-signed transaction spending it hasn't changed its TX ID, and there's nothing to re-sign, and there's no like fork in the path of unsigned transactions. So this player does this, okay, he puts a move on the board, and then now we have a new output. And this new output, in order to spend, player O needs to put down a move. And so now this next output has access to a commitment to the first move and a commitment to the second move. The second output can actually look at those and reason through the rules of tic-tac-toe and say, well, an X and an O can't be in the same place. And if there are 3 in a row, then somebody wins and so on. And so you can actually verify the rules here. And in this case, you actually don't need to worry about equivocation. You don't need to worry about somebody signing the same thing twice, because they wouldn't gain any advantage because the blockchain is actually enforcing the rules of tic-tac-toe. This is kind of like a really surreal example. And so you have this game where there's 9 factorial-ish different paths through the game, and you're able to embed this in just 9 straight transactions, where you know the TXID of all of them, and you can pre-sign them and get like some third party of like tic-tac-toe referees to pre-sign them all, so nobody can try redirecting the coins. And this is the kind of thing that if we were having this conversation in like 2017 or even in 2021, you would think like you need Ethereum style, like a real key value store on the blockchain that every node is maintaining, right? And here I am just doing it in Bitcoin. In Bitcoin script, remember, with no forks. Tic-tac-toe is small. You don't need opcat. You don't need big values here, right? So I don't know, it's pretty wild. I don't have like a pithy like ta-da or anything, but it's pretty wild. Yeah, so I'll stop there. As one final thing, I'll just toss this link out there, and when I publish these slides really is the point of these links. This one goes to, actually I will quickly tab over. I see people taking pictures, but this one is a bitcoindev mailing list post, signing a Bitcoin transaction with Lamport signatures, no changes needed, by Ethan Hellman 4 days ago. Let me go back. So this is an idea where Ethan Hellman has an idea where he maybe can actually get a transaction hash of sorts in a form that small script can understand by using the variable length property of the ECDSA signatures that are in pre-taproot transactions. And then using this, he basically, it involves a lot of pre-computation and grinding, and then you get like this weird kind of repeated signature construction. I can't go into it here, with like it would have to be its own talk. But the moral of the story that I'm just going to throw at you, even though it has nothing to do with the rest of my talk, is that maybe, this was 4 days ago, right? And in the intervening time, I've been talking to Ethan, and we've kind of like refined it a bit and thought about like, can we tie it into Taproot where we can do BitVM kind of stuff? Maybe by the time that people online are watching this recorded video, we will have covenants in Bitcoin. And some really awful. If you thought that covenants based on cat were awful, wait till you see the covenants based on not cat. But maybe they'll be there. And all of these difficult conversations that Chris said so kindly that we need to start having, we won't have to have. And all it took was a lot of clever ideas with unforeseen consequences. And we did it. Thank you for listening.